the Ministry of Interior says it surpassed the 2 billion naira revenue target set for the ministry in 2024 and generated 5.6 billion naira to the federal purse. Minister of Interior Olubunmi Tuju revealed this at the National Assembly when he appeared before a joint committee on Interior for Budget Defense. The minister said despite getting zero capital allocation for 2024, the ministry successfully executed various multi-billion naira capital projects in 2024. The minister said this is made possible by reviewing and enforcing existing contracts, compelling contractors to fulfill their obligations as stipulated in the agreement.
In total, our IGR target for 2024 was 2 billion. That was what was the target as approved. But in actual sense, we were able to raise 5,638,464,682 naira 8 kobo, which in line with government extant regulations get remitted to the Consolidated Revenue Fund of Government. Part of the reasons why we were also able to up the system is the modernization of almost all our systems. And of course, the reduction in the cost component of our project implementation framework. When I say reduction, like what we inherited was a scenario where we were housing our data in private hands and etc. That cost had been taken off. So government is now in charge of government data. The president in December came to commission the project.
Thank you for your presentation. I believe we are satisfied with your explanation. If there are more questions, like you said, after this budget season, we can have a special session to discuss those issues with all cameras shut out. And trusting that we too will keep what is meant to be state secret as state secret.
I want to commend the minister for a job well done, especially in the area of revenue collection. 3
of my constituencies are at the border areas, and the 3 of them are equally affected by Boko Haram and are the most affected, even in Borno State. I have not seen anywhere where you have made any effort to make things different, maybe by looking at the borders or by maybe even looking at infrastructures at the border areas and or any other effort that you would have made to complement the efforts of the military in combating the insurgency around that area.
And now the Central Bank of Nigeria says it has fined 9 banks 1.35 billion for failing to make cash available through ATMs during Christmas and New Year celebration. The fines were imposed on the banks to demonstrate zero tolerance for cash flow disruptions. The sanctions were imposed on the banks following repeated warnings to ensure the availability of cash, especially during periods of high demand. The CBN says it will not hesitate to impose further sanctions on any institution found violating its cash circulation guidelines. In the meantime, Nigeria's headline inflation rate rose for the 4th straight month in December of 2024, advancing to 34.8% in annual terms from 34.6% in November. Data from the Statistics Agency showed on Wednesday. The NBS said in a report that the uptick in December was due to increased demand associated with the festive period. Food and non-alcoholic beverages contributed the most to price pressures. According to a report, it says that inflation rose sharply after President Bola Tinubu devalued the naira and cut fuel subsidies back in 2023 in a bid to lift economic growth and shore up public finances. Looking down the inflation table, urban inflation printed a strong 37.29% in the final month of 2024, while rural inflation was reported at 32.47%. Well, I'm joined now by economist and MD CEO at GAPS Financial Services Limited, Idika Kalu Uma. Also with me is Professor Chiso Ndokwe Okafor, who is Executive Director at the Consumer Advocacy and Empowerment Foundation, joining us from Lagos studio. Thank you, both of you, for joining us. But let me start from Mr. Idika Kalu. Let's begin with the fines, for instance. 9 banks were fined 1.35 billion naira for allegedly holding cash. Do you think this is an effective deterrent, or are there systemic issues that this penalty fails to address, in your own opinion?
Thank you very much. I think the central bank has moved in the right direction by penalizing banks that have hoarded or rationed cash that's available in the system, or that have been involved in illegal cash activities, or violated regulations concerning cash. But there is a case that comes to point, a celebrated case in 1921, Joachimsen versus Swiss Bank Corporation. In that celebrated case, the courts enunciated 8 principal duties of banks to customers. I'll take the first 2, which is very pertinent to this issue. One, that banks must receive deposits and, of course, collect checks and money orders for their customers. That's one. And the second one, quickly, is that banks must pay monies deposited, whether in whole or in part, with the consent or authority of their customers. Why is this very important? It's important because cash is very important in the economy. In economics, we have narrow money and broad money. So cash and coins, demand deposits constitute the narrow definition of money. Then when you have, that's M1, then M2 is when you have savings accounts, time deposits, other kinds of deposits, and even currency deposits. They make up M2. So the 2 show you money supply in the system by the Central Bank of Nigeria. So notes and coins, we don't have coins, but we have notes, play a very critical role. So the vast majority of the population, particularly in the rural areas, have to transact, small businesses, with cash. So hoarding cash or any kind of rationing money will be detrimental to the system. And that is why the central bank has come up hard. The governor said that at the annual dinner of the Charter of Bankers last year, 2024, that he will come heavy on banks that tend to frustrate the flow of cash. And this is very, very important because the CBN has a program. That program is to make sure that there is financial inclusion, that people transact more electronically, but then there should still be cash. So now, what the banks are doing when you don't have cash available is that they are frustrating, small businesses and households from really transacting because all over the country you need notes and coins for your transactions.
I know there are arguments whether to put that blame on the banks or not, but let me go to Prof in our Lagos studio. The CBN, emphasized a commitment to maintaining a seamless cashless policy. To speak to us about what you think, why the banks, have failed in complying with these cashless policy.
Well, for me, as representing the consumers, one of the challenges on ground is that when you don't make cash accessible, like Mr. Ita said, you deny consumers the opportunity to do business. But besides that, you penalize consumers twice. So you go to a bank, an ATM machine to withdraw cash, and they tell you can only take 5,000 naira at a time. Some banks will allow you 20,000, but you have to take it 5,000 at a time. As a result of that, you pay the penalty 4 times for withdrawing money that you could have withdrawn once. But you watch, they say there's no cash on the ATM, but the POS agents always have cash. And so it begs for me to say that, is there a conspiracy? Are the banks conspiring in order to make more money? I'm not saying anything of such, but that's what it does. The second thing is that it reduces the trust factor. Because now consumers don't trust banks. They don't trust CBN, because if CBN said something and the banks are not obeying. And so I'm very excited at the position that CBN has taken at the sanctions of banks, because it's improved the trust factor in the Nigerian economy. Everybody was excited when this was done. And so enforcement of existing policies is something that needs to be done consistently across the board. Only 10 banks were sanctioned, but we know, of course, that almost all the banks were guilty of as charged.
You know, additionally, some banks claim that the infrastructure or logistic issue you know, is a challenge in this space. But speak to us in terms of cash distribution. Do you think these excuses are genuine? Because what the banks are saying is, look, we have, you know, logistic issues. I mean, we couldn't distribute as we were. I mean, we ought to distribute. Perhaps they do not have even much cash themselves in their vault. How do you address that?
Well, I beg to disagree, because in the past, they were able to have cash in their ATMs. Why suddenly they're not having cash? It could be that they never had enough cash in their vaults. I don't know. They didn't take me into the vault, so I can't tell about that. But one thing I know is that logistics argument does not make sense, because in the past, they always had cash in the banks. So what happened to the logistic systems? Did they change their systems? So logistics as an argument doesn't fly. It has to be something more than that. And if they believe that the challenges, if the banks believe that the challenges they have is logistics, then I guess they can go to court and prove that. But it doesn't make sense. With that argument, doesn't really make sense to me. You know, we have to remember that all of us are consumers. Right. That whatever affects one affects all.
Okay, let me go to Idikalu. You know, as of March 2024, Nigeria had approximately 1.9 million POS agents and over 2.7 million POS terminals. And some have raised concern about how, you know, what should have, you know, have eased access to, you know, cash has become a means of survival for many Nigerians, putting pressure on the banks. You know, how do you address these? Because some have said this is a structural issue. Because banks, of course, CBN will continue to print, you know, money, notes, of course, and this note is supposed to go into productivity. But the concern, therefore, is that the money are not being put into use productively. So, of course, people have to think about a way to survive. So speak to these concerns about the structural and systemic problem in addressing this issue.
Okay, what's happening has a background. Way back in 2007, the CBN dreamt of a payment system vision 2020, PSV 2020 for short. And the aim was to make sure that more monies are channeled into the banking system and that people transact electronically. And to give wings to that objective, in 2012, they came up with the National Financial Inclusion Strategy, in which they launched that with the aim to have 80% of Nigerians in the financial system. But down the line to 2020, they observed that their financial inclusion strategy was not working And so they came up with a cash withdrawal limit policy or cash regulation in which over-the-counter transactions, ATM transactions, POS transactions had limits. For corporates, you don't draw more than 500,000 in a week. And for individuals, you don't draw more than 100,000. And for ATM transactions, corporates don't do more than 100,000 a week. Same for individuals. POS, you withdraw 20,000 a day. So there was hue and cry that this policy cannot work. So the central bank changed. And now, for over-the-counter transactions, corporates can withdraw 5 million, while individuals can withdraw 500,000. Also, for ATM transactions, it went up to 100,000 for individuals. And of course, the same thing, 500,000, sorry, for individuals, and for POS transactions, 100,000. What this meant was that people started having fears that most of their funds would be trapped in the banking system. So people started holding back much of their funds. And so what happened was that you now have a lot of money outside the banking system. In a data released by the central bank in August 2024, the central bank said 4.14 trillion is money in circulation. But out of this 4.14 trillion, that 3.87 trillion was outside the banking system, leaving only 6.66% in the banking system. What does that tell you? It tells you that we have a lot more cash outside the banking system being hoarded and not available for banks. And of course, the central bank's monetary policy cannot work effectively if money in circulation outside the banking system is not within its control. And so what has happened now is that banks, according to the financial regulation of the CBN, are permitted to give out or pay out money that they receive. So all the cash lodgements you make in the bank in a day, that is what the bank is permitted to pay out. So if a bank gets 3 billion, you don't expect it to pay out 4 billion. They say it's a cash control measure. And they don't get sufficient cash from the central bank. That's another point. They don't get sufficient cash from the central bank. And so when the central bank says they should load their ATMs, something happens. The POS...
Okay, all right. Okay, just because of our time, I just wanted to go to, but land on that note, the POS and so I can go to...
The POS operators, they have various cards, bank cards.
Right.
So once they load the ATM, one or two of them can stand there and draw down money that should have gone all over. So there is a business going on, outside the banking system. And you find out that a problem by the banks, their platforms, their banking platforms are not operational. And so that is what is channeling people to the POS.
All right. Okay. Let me go to Prof. Prof, I would like to have your final thought on this. I mean, what measures would you want to see on ground to address? Because, of course, Mr. Edekakalu just said that there's a business outside the bank. Perhaps there's a cartel, trying to create an economy outside the bank, economy of Naira, sales of Naira. So what measures would you want to see on ground, to address this going forward? Because we saw that in 2023 during the change of Naira note, and the same thing we experienced last year, December as well. So speak to these issues, the measures you want to see on ground to address such occurrence.
Well, like Mr. Issa said, the issue with financial inclusion, there is a vast majority of Nigerians that are unbanked. And because they are unbanked, they need to transact with cash. And we have been told to have our NINs and our BVNs, and we've complied. If a POS agent is doing this particular type of activity, using artificial intelligence, using technology, you can track, using their BVNs and their NINs to track who has been withdrawing, is it a POS agent, so that the proper sanctions can be given out, meted out to these particular agents. We have to utilize technology. Yes, we want to be a cashless society, but you cannot have a proper cashless society if you don't have the appropriate technology from the banking sector, from CBN, so that the consumers don't pay for their inefficiencies. Consumers should not pay for inactions. Consumers should not be penalized. Our people are suffering enough, and so we need to try and make things easy. We haven't even gotten to the unbanked. Financial inclusion does not include a lot of people, persons with disability, or people in the remote areas. And we're talking even in the urban areas, and we're suffering this much. Imagine people in the remote areas that don't even have any banks or ATM machines close by within their villages. You can imagine what is going on. And if people are hoarding their money, we need to find out why. You've given an example, but 4 years have passed by. I wonder, who are those who are hoarding the money? It's not the regular consumer that you find on the street, because I don't see them hoarding over 3 trillion, you said. That issue also needs to be addressed. And this is from a policy perspective that CBN, in collaboration with the banks, with the financial sector, should look into. All
right. I think we just have to leave the conversation there. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. Idika Kalu, Umar economist, chartered banker, and Prof. Chiso Ndokwe Okafor. Thank you, Executive Director, Consumer Advocacy and Empowerment Foundation. Thank you, both of you, for joining us on Newsnight.